Well, hello everyone. This is Greg Anderson, and welcome back to the Life, Love, God podcast, based on the autobiography of Norman Paulsen, who was a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. Today we begin talking about Chapter 7, Growing Up, and this is our episode 8. So let's bring things up to date now. Norm was born in 1929. It's now 1939, so he's 10 years old. Norm's father has just lost his bid for a U.S. congressional seat. Eileen, Norm's mother, has just lost her election for the California Assembly again. And Charles had become deeply withdrawn, in fact, in Norm's estimation, into a depression. Charles' mother, Carolyn, had moved in next door, and Carolyn and Nana, who was his mom's mother, had heated arguments, creating a great division in the family. So Eileen, Norm's mother, moves to her sister Elna's house in Pasadena. So she moves out, splitting up the family. Norm wrote, "Suddenly I felt desperately alone, calling on Spirit to help me, but there was no answer. Only a deep dread and stillness prevailed." So this was a real learning experience for Norman at this young age. Charles, his father, moves next door with his mother Carolyn, and Norm stayed there with Nana and just felt like his father was sort of pushing him out of his life at that point in time. Now, this is probably a good time as any to bring this up, but about a year later, Charles was walking across the street in Santa Barbara, and he was hit by a car and had some serious injuries and had to be hospitalized. Norman felt, even at that young age, that his father had purposely turned off his ability to see despite his blindness, and that had led to his injuries. And he said that his father, although he recovered, he never fully recovered. He always suffered the rest of his life with the problems that had developed as a result of the accident. So one day, Norm comes home to find that his mom has arrived, and her car's out in front. And she had come to pick up Nana and Norman. And there was a man with her whom I sensed was going to be around for a while. Mom said, "Norman, meet Don Prosser. He's going to help us move. He's a dear friend of mine." And Norm wrote, "Don Prosser was a good-hearted man. I liked him from the start, but I knew he would never quite understand me, and my summation proved correct." So Don and Norm's mother, Eileen, married somewhere around 1939, 1940. In fact, the 1940 census lists Don and Eileen as already married and living in San Fernando Valley. So it's the summer of 1939. Norm has now moved from Lompoc to San Fernando Valley in the village of Northridge at the time. His mother had purchased a home there. This is a photo of Northridge in about 1940, and as you can see, it doesn't look anything like it does today. It was very rural with many farms and ranches, and Norm enrolled in Northridge Elementary School for the new school year, so he was getting ready to start a new school. Shortly after moving in, Norm realized that their neighbors many of them were movie stars. In a ranch nearby, Clark Gable and Carol Lombard lived. Nearly bordering his property was what they called him Wild Bill Elliott. He used to play Wild Bill Hickok. He made maybe 50 films, and he was a great lover of both paint horses and Appaloosa horses, and he used to invite Norm over to ride his horses, which Norm really enjoyed. And then Spencer Tracy was another neighbor who Norm actually got to meet because he was working with a friend. I think they were baling hay or something, and Spencer Tracy saw them out there in the heat and invited them over for lunch and lemonade and showed them around his place. So this was kind of a new world for Norm, and he was meeting people who basically the whole world knew at the time. Norman made new friends there in Northridge with some twin brothers named John and Vernon Winship. John and Norman were very close. Their father had turned their front yard into a boxing ring, so whenever there was an argument between the two brothers, they put on the gloves and went out in the front and basically had a refereed boxing match. John was an inspiration to Norman because he was very muscular. Norm thought John had the largest biceps he'd ever seen in somebody that age, and he records that one day he watched John do 52, or it was either 52 or 53 chin-ups all at one time. So this boxing training allowed Norman to survive this new Northridge Elementary School, which Norm described as rough and tough and fight to survive. So the next year, Charles calls Norm in Northridge and invites him to come up to Lompoc for Easter. And that would mean that Norm would take the train by himself from Northridge to the surf train station near Lompoc. And he would travel on Old Daylight, a locomotive that ran the Pacific a line for years. And below you see a picture of the old Northridge train station where Norm left on this trip. So as he boarded the train, it passed through the Chatsworth Tunnel at Santa Susana Pass to go over into Simi Valley, and Norm had a sudden premonition. He saw the train grind to a stop in the tunnel, the engine blew up, and the whole train caught on fire. So that didn't happen on this trip, but 1 year later, a freight train blew up, caught on fire in the tunnel, and there were probably about 20 or 30 cars that had cattle in them also, and all the cattle and crew were overcome and died in the tunnel. So Norm's premonition came true. So I want to make a little bit of a comparison between the idea of intuition and premonition. So intuition is the immediate cognition without the use of conscious rational processes. In other words, you know something, but there was no rational thought that went behind it. You just suddenly know it. An example of Norm's intuition in this chapter was the feeling that Norm had about his parents, that they were going to separate and divorce. And in his words, he wrote, 10 years of my earthly sojourn had now passed. I intuitively felt the approach of a dreaded event, an event that would change the direction of my life drastically. And of course it did. Within a matter of time, his parents were separated, his mother moved south, and then Norm the next summer came down to live there in Northridge. So a brand new home for Norman. So a premonition is a clairvoyant or clairaudient experience, meaning you see it or you hear it, such as in a dream or even in a waking state, which resonates with some event that's about to happen in the future. So almost all enlightened beings have very highly developed senses of intuition and have had premonition. And all people can develop intuition, but Norm at a very early age was beginning to follow and listen to intuition, which helped him to develop it even faster at an early age. So later on, we're going to discuss some of the intuition and premonition found in this chapter. So on his visit to Lompoc for Easter, his father says to him, Norman, come here and meet Dorothy. In Santa Barbara, she took wonderful care of me in the hospital, and we have now become very close to each other. So, as you see in the picture here, this is a picture of Charles. In the picture to the left of Charles is his brother, and to the right of Charles, wearing the hat, is Charles' mother. And then you see the arrow I have pointing there to Dorothy at the end of the table. Dorothy was a registered nurse and worked at the clinic or hospital that Charles went to after his auto versus pedestrian accident. And Norm wrote, I knew he really needed a friend and someone who truly cared for him. Dorothy would be Dad's friend for the rest of his life, and mine also. And then we know now that Charles and Dorothy married in 1943, so just a few years later. So, in this chapter, which is entitled Growing Up, we see that Norman does grow up in this chapter, in these year and a half, 2 years that this chapter covers. And part of it was the development of his intuition. You know, he intuitively felt the approach of a dreaded event, as we already said, the separation of his parents and their divorce. But he also had intuition when he returned to home one day and saw his mother's car out in front of the house. And she knew that meant that she was getting ready to leave. And he begged her not to leave because her family would never be the same, but she had to leave anyway. And then there was another instance of intuition in this chapter where intuitively Norm felt that Charles' auto accident, or auto versus pedestrian accident in Santa Barbara, was the result of his father's deepening depression at separation and divorce, and maybe even loss of his political race and so forth. He felt that his father had turned off his own intuitive powers to be able to see, even though he was blind. As far as premonition is concerned, there was the premonition he had of the burning train in the tunnel, but at the end of the chapter he says another premonition dawned, and this was a good one. Many familiar faces would appear in the future. We, as spirit friends, would be united again. So Norman realized that there was something happening. His life was being laid out before him, and there was going to be a time when people that he knew before or as spirits would be united in some great work. So in moving to Los Angeles, he was forced to make new friends and start a new school. He did train travel by himself for the very first time. He learned to defend himself. As he talked about school, he said, school was a fighting to survive experience for me. And then coming to grips with parental divorce and new friends and partners with his parents, that's a very difficult thing for young people to do, and he did it with grace and acceptance. But Norm wrote, he said, I had become trapped in the outer activities of growing up. Spirit told me, don't forget who you are, Norman. And I just want to make the point that once a young person realizes they're growing up, they've grown up. I mean, it's happening at that moment. So I believe this chapter was very well named, and Norm grew in a lot of different ways at this particular age in his life. So I would encourage you to please leave comments on our podcast, well, hopefully positive comments, as well as please subscribe to the Sunburst YouTube channel so that you know when all new podcasts or videos come out. And in preparation for next month, please read Chapter 8, The War Years. And I look forward to meeting with you again.